The storm outside the art gallery broke like shattered glass across the sky, but inside, the hall was silent enough to hear the echo of a heartbeat. People moved like shadows, admiring the portraits that hung under soft golden lights. But the moment the janitor stepped inside, his breath caught in his throat as if invisible fingers had tightened around it. He stared at the largest portrait at the center of the gallery. A young woman with sorrow in her eyes and a strength carved beneath her delicate features. And in that instant, his knees trembled. He dropped the bucket he was holding, and the clatter made several visitors turn. The curator walked toward him, initially annoyed, but her irritation melted when she saw the horror and disbelief sweeping across the old man's face. His lips moved slowly, trembling, and he murmured words that struck her like a lightning bolt. "Ma'am, the girl lived with me in the orphanage. This is her. I raised her. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and the unseen struggles behind every face, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps these powerful stories reach more hearts." The janitor, named Samuel, was normally invisible to people, blending into the background with his silent steps and gentle manners. He was one of those souls whose life had been shaped by heartbreak early, and he had dedicated everything he had to caring for the forgotten children of a small-town orphanage where he had spent 30 years of his life. But life had grown heavy, and old age had pushed him out of the orphanage as funding decreased and staff was let go. He had reluctantly taken a job as a cleaner in the city, carrying memories that haunted him every night. Among all the children he had cared for, there was one he could never forget, a girl named Leonor. She had been brought to the orphanage at the age of 5, traumatized, silent, and trembling like a fragile leaf caught in an unforgiving wind. She had clung to him the first night, her sobs buried in his shirt as he held her until dawn. He remembered the way she would draw pictures on scraps of paper, using broken crayons and dull pencils, creating art that spoke of sorrows she could never express in words. As Samuel now stared at the portrait, his eyes filled with tears. The painting captured everything about her: her soft brown eyes, her long dark hair, and that faint, unspoken sadness she always carried. It was her, without question. But how had she reached here? Why was her portrait displayed like a masterpiece in a prestigious city gallery? And why did her eyes, even in paint, look like they were begging for someone to understand the story behind them? The curator watched him carefully as he struggled to regain his composure. She explained that the portrait belonged to a rising artist named Elias Fawn, a man whose work had caught the attention of international critics. This portrait, titled "The Girl Who Survived," had become the centerpiece of his exhibition, though he had never disclosed who she was or what she meant to him. Many speculated she was a muse, a lover, or a tragic character from his past. No one knew the truth. No one except Samuel, who now felt the ground shift beneath him as memories of Leonor flooded him with a force he could barely withstand. Years ago, Leonor had been the quietest child in the orphanage, but also the one who felt emotions in the deepest way. While the other children played, she would draw. When they laughed, she would observe, and when they cried, she would hold their hands. Samuel remembered one rainy evening when she had painted a small portrait of him in her tiny notebook. It was messy and childlike, but she had looked up at him with those big, honest eyes, and he had felt something break open inside him. A tenderness he had never known before. She became the daughter he never had, and he tried to shield her from every misery the world had already thrown at her. But life was unpredictable and cruel. When she was 11, a fire broke out in the orphanage building. It spread too fast, consuming wooden walls and fragile hopes. The chaos that followed was something Samuel still relived in nightmares. Children screaming, smoke filling the halls, flames reaching like monstrous hands. He had grabbed as many children as he could and rushed them outside. But when the fire was finally controlled, Liarner was nowhere to be found. Rescuers searched for hours, and Samuel ran through the burnt ruins until his legs gave out, calling her name again and again. The officials declared her missing, presumed dead, but Samuel never accepted it. For years, he tried to find her, even when people said he was losing his mind by clinging to false hope. The pain had eventually forced him into silence, but not acceptance. And now, here she was staring back at him from a canvas. The curator grew concerned as Samuel swayed slightly, so she led him to a chair, asking him to explain how he knew the girl. With a trembling voice, he told her everything, from the day Liarner arrived to the night she disappeared. The curator's eyes widened with shock. She admitted that Elias Thon had never explained who the girl in the portrait was, only that she was the strongest person he had ever known. Samuel felt his heart accelerate. Elias, the name meant nothing to him, but there was only one way to know. The curator revealed that Elias would be arriving at the gallery later that evening for a private preview. Samuel waited, his mind spinning, his hands shaking with anticipation. Hours passed like seconds. When Elias finally walked in, tall, soft-spoken, and carrying the calm aura of someone who had lived through storms and survived them, Samuel stood up, unable to contain his emotions. Elias approached the portrait, touched its frame gently, and whispered something the others could not hear, something tender, something that suggested love mixed with grief. And the moment Samuel stepped forward, Elias turned toward him, and a strange understanding flickered in his eyes. Elias had his own story, and it was tangled with Liarner's in ways Samuel could have never imagined. After the fire, it turned out that Liarner had survived but had been taken by rescue workers to a city hospital before anyone could confirm her identity. Traumatized and unable to speak for months, she was later transferred to another children's shelter, where Elias, who was a troubled teenager himself, had also been living. They had grown close, two wounded souls finding comfort in each other's silent companionship. She taught him how to draw faces that expressed emotions he had never learned to verbalize, and he taught her how to trust again. They had promised each other they would build new lives one day. But life took another cruel turn when Liarner, at the age of 17, was adopted by a family that soon moved abroad. She had left Elias a final drawing, one of him smiling, with the words, "Thank you for helping me breathe again," written on the back. She disappeared from his life after that. Elias spent years searching for her with no success. He feared she didn't want to be found or that something had happened to her. So he poured his longing and grief into his art. This portrait was his tribute to the girl who saved him when he was drowning. When Samuel heard all this, tears streamed down his cheeks. Liarner had lived. She had survived. She had grown. She had loved and been loved. The weight he had carried for years slowly lifted, replaced by a bittersweet ache. Elias asked Samuel if he had any photograph of her from the orphanage. Samuel nodded and took out his worn wallet, pulling a small, faded picture of a young Liarner with paint smudges on her cheeks. Elias gasped softly, tracing the picture with trembling fingers. The curator watched them both, overwhelmed by the realization that this portrait held the broken pieces of three intertwined lives, each one carrying its share of loss, love, and longing. As the rain finally stopped outside, the gallery lights reflected gently across the marble floor like shards of hope. Samuel looked up at the portrait again, this time with a sense of peace. He imagined Liarna somewhere in the world, alive, breathing, perhaps painting still. He prayed she was happy, safe, and loved. He no longer needed answers. Knowing she lived was enough. But as he began to turn away, Elias placed a hand on his shoulder gently. He said he would continue searching for her, and now he would do it with Samuel beside him. Together, they would try to find the girl who had changed both their lives. Even if it took years, even if it led them across continents, they owed her that much. If this story touched your heart, please like, comment, share, and subscribe. Your support helps us bring more emotional stories to life. Before we end speech balloon special, request a comment below. Hope always finds a way. If you believe in miracles just like this one,